These are a couple more perspex tables that I've made. These tables are quite handy to have at the side of your bed, and they're very colourful, and also the perspex will never fade because it's guaranteed for 10 years. They can't take a great deal of weight, but they are very decorative. So this one, for example, you could put a lamp on there, put your drink on there, as long as there's a coaster on it, and then put your magazines underneath. So by using this kind of technique, you could actually make bookshelves or a shoe rack or anything just with a bit of chrome tube and some perspex. And these are actually made using 8mm threaded bar, which comes in metre lengths. And originally when I started to make these tables, I made them using the full length of the threaded bar, but then I actually cut them down to about 70 centimetres, so I ended up cutting 300mm or about 12 inch off. So now I'm going to show you how to make a table like this. To make this table we're going to need 3 pieces of perspex, all cut in the same size, which is 14 inches square. So I'm going to start off by putting a straight edge on this piece of perspex, because this particular piece isn't quite straight here. It's been cut with a jigsaw or something in the past. So the first step is to just mark a straight line down there. And would you believe it, my permanent marker is actually blue as well, so it is difficult for you to see the line. I can see it quite clearly from here, but I'm guessing that you're going to struggle seeing it. So now I've got a straight line going in that direction. I can now put one going in that direction using this square. And now from that line I can now measure the 14 inches. And then I can use the square again. And then I can measure 14 inches in that way. And 14 inches in there. And then I can just go straight across there. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to clamp that straight edge onto the perspex so that I've got a nice straight edge to follow with my circular saw. If you actually look at the saw, you'll see that the actual blade cuts approximately 25mm from the side of the base plate there. So we need to set that piece of angle iron that's going to be our straight edge 25mm back from the cut line. So now we've got the straight edge in the correct place, we can clamp it in position using some quick acting clamps. Whenever you use a circular saw to cut anything, it's important that you set the blade to the correct depth. If you were to cut through the perspex with the blade like that, you're wasting quite a lot of energy on the friction as it's going through the material. So it's essential that you adjust the blade so that it just goes through the material. So now I've set the machine up, I can now put the battery on it. Another essential point when you're cutting anything with a circular saw is to put a pair of safety glasses on. And whenever you're cutting perspex with a circular saw, it's important that you start the machine before you touch the perspex. You don't want to touch the machine onto the perspex and then press the button, because if you do that you're going to chip the perspex. So you always start the machine up a couple of millimetres away from the perspex that you're cutting. And if you stop to change hands or anything, it's important that you pull it back away from the perspex before you start it going again. So now when I make this cut, that'll be the first piece of our table, and we'll have 3 identical pieces all the same size, and we can start to finish the edges and chamfer the corners off. So there, as you can see now, we've got 3 identical pieces of perspex, which we can now make into a table. So now I've taped the 3 pieces together using some masking tape, and that's just holding those 3 together until we've drilled it, because we want the drills to be in the exact same place on each one. So we need to drill completely through the top 2 pieces and partially into the bottom one. And then the top 2 pieces will be drilled with an 8mm clearance hole, and the bottom one will be drilled with a 6.8mm drill, and that'll be drilled to a depth of about 5mm, and then we can tap the hole. So now I'm just going to mark on here where I want the drill holes to be. So I'm going to drill the outer holes. I've now put a 4mm pilot drill in there, and in a minute I'm going to drill through all 3 pieces of perspex all in one go, and that's where the bottom piece will end up. So we'll end up drilling about 3mm into the surface of it. So I'm now going to put my safety glasses on, and I'm going to leave the guide in the up position just so that you can see the actual drill bit. So now that we've drilled the 4 pilot holes, we can now remove the masking tape. So now I've put the 8mm drill in the pillar drill, and I'm now going to drill a clearance hole straight through. I've set the depth stop on the drill so that the drill will not go all the way through the material that we're drilling. And I've put a 6.8mm drill bit in there, which is the correct size drill bit for tapping an 8mm hole. So before I go any further, I'm going to drill a test hole in this piece of scrap perspex. So that there is a test hole that I've drilled, and it's not come through the other side, and it's also deep enough to tap. So now I know that the drill is set at the correct depth. So now I've got the 6.8mm drill bit in here, and it's set to the correct depth so that we won't go all the way through this perspex. So now I'm going to drill the 4 holes in the top, which will be tapped later. So I've now got a M8 plug tab in a tap wrench, and I'm now going to tap these 4 holes out. So all we need to do is get the tap started and ensure that it's straight. And turn it in a clockwise direction and give it a couple of turns, and then turn it back on itself to break the chip off, and then just give it a few more turns, and that'll cut a thread in the perspex. And then when you've done that, you can remove it, and then you can test it with a piece of threaded bar, and that should screw in there nicely. And then once we've got our threaded bar in, we will lock it up with a nut later on. As you can see, the corners of these are quite sharp now, so I'm going to remove those. I'm going to put a radius on there, and to put the radius on I'm going to use an angle grinder with a flat disc. You can cut that off with a jigsaw if you like, or you can take it off using a belt sander, but I'm going to use an angle grinder with a flat disc in. So before I do that, I'm just going to put my safety glasses on, and then I'll just put a clamp on it. And there you can see I've put a nice radius on there, so that if anybody does walk into it, they're now not going to get injured. So I've now clamped the perspex securely in the workmate, and I've put some cardboard down the edges here to protect the perspex. And now I'm going to give this a good sand with some abrasive paper, and then I'm going to reduce it to a finer grade, and then I'll clean it up with the wet and dry paper, and then I'll polish it. So I've put a pair of gloves on for this, a pair of glasses. I've also got a dust mask on and some ear defenders. So now I'm going to give it a rub down with some 600 grade wet and dry paper. This is a 1200 grade wet and dry paper. We're just going to do all 4 edges with this, and then we'll move on to the rubbing compound. So the next stage is to apply some rubbing compound with a cloth. Now you can rub that by hand if you want, just using a rag, but it's very time consuming. So I've actually put a mop in the end of the cordless drill. I've got a pair of safety gloves on, a pair of safety glasses. I'm now going to polish that using the drill, which will save us a lot of time. So we're just going to repeat that now on all 4 sides. And then the final stage is to apply the metal polish. And again, we'll polish that off with using the mop. So you can see there that we've got a nice polished edge all the way around. And now we just need to repeat that on the other two pieces, and then we can start the final assembly. To make the legs for this table, we're going to use 1 metre long lengths of 8mm threaded bar. And we're just going to screw those directly into the tabletop. And then we're going to use some 19mm chrome wardrobe rail, which is going to need cutting down. So the first thing we're going to do is cut 120mm off there, because that's the height that we want the first shelf at. So we'll just slide the tube through the tube cutter. And then we can cut 4 lengths of this off. And to use a tube cutter like this, you just turn the handle and turn it around the pipe, and then turn the handle a little bit more, and just keep repeating that process. So you do a revolution and then just tighten it a bit, do another revolution, tighten it a bit more, and just keep repeating that until the tube is cut all the way through. And then when you've cut it, we're just going to deburr it with a deburring tool. So we're now going to start assembling the table. This is the tabletop, and that's the underside of it with the 4 tapped holes. So we're now going to lay this down, and we can now remove the masking from the underside. And those marks on it there are only metal polish, and they'll clean off there easily. So we're just going to thread 2 nuts on each end of this. And we're just going to space them out so that that is approximately the length of the spacer piece that we're going to put in for the first shelf. And we'll just have that one back a bit from the end of the thread. And then we're going to apply a little bit of super glue to the end of the threads there. And then we're going to screw that into the hole. And we're just going to nip that up. We're now going to repeat that procedure on the other 3 holes. Now that all 4 pieces of threaded bar are in place, we can now tighten up these nuts against the tabletop. And then we can just nip those up using a spanner. And they only need a very small turn, just so that they're tight against the surface of the perspex. So we can now take one of our spacers and get the correct height for the spacing nuts. So that nut needs to be exactly level with the end of that tube. Now we're going to get some insulation tape, and we're going to wrap this around the nuts, and this will stop the chrome tubes from rattling on the actual threaded bar, and they'll also help to hold it in place. And you can also put this on the spacer nut. And now we can cut the spacer tubes that we cut earlier and place them over the top of the threaded bar. And then we can take our other piece that's drilled all the way through and we can remove the masking. And we'll just give that a wipe to get rid of some of the metal polish. So now we're just going to put that over the top of the threaded bar and slide it down. And now that's in position. So now what we need to do is wind another 4 nuts down. 1 nut down each of the pieces of threaded bar. That took about 5 minutes to wind that nut down the threaded bar. So we're just going to nip that up against the perspex for now. And then we'll just repeat that on the other 3 studs. Now what we need to do is tighten the 4 nuts up. And then we can wrap those nuts up with some more insulation tape. And now we're going to cut some more chrome tubing to 830mm long. Now we can take a measurement using the tube leg and put a mark, and we know where to put our nut to hold the bottom shelf in position. I've actually run out of standard nuts now, so I've got those 2 left that we can put on there easily, and then the nylock. Now these are difficult to get on because they have a nylon locking ring on the inside, so I'll have to use a spanner to move them all the way down. And again we can wrap the insulation tape around these. And then we can thread the tube over the threaded bar. Now we can take the final shelf and remove the masking from that. And then we'll just give that a quick wipe to remove any metal polish. And then we can place that on to the studs. And then we're going to put 4 nylock nuts on here, which will hold it all together. You have to be careful when you're tightening the nuts up not to damage the perspex, but it's not that important anyway because that is the bottom. So now we've got them all nipped up, I'm just going to tighten them all. But I'm not going to go mad because I don't want to crack the perspex. And then all we need to do then is cap the ends off using a dome nut. And we'll just tighten those up. And then that's it, we just need to turn it upside down then. And then finally we can remove the masking from the top.